All right, we're live. We're live here with Ashleigh Faith. She's a veteran of the content creation game, and um, Ashleigh is the founder and content developer for It's a Data Thing YouTube channel. She's been a long-standing content creator and educator in the space of graph data science, symbolic AI, knowledge representation and reasoning. She has a PhD in computer science, and she's been contributing to industry for longer than a decade. Uh, Ashleigh is covering a very important topic that isn't covered enough: content, copyright, and trust. And I, for one, am delighted to be in the front row of this presentation. Um, where are you calling in from again?
Normally, I'm in Boston, but you caught me in a different state. I'm in California right now.
You have three conferences this week, don't you?
I do. I'm in the middle of one physically and doing this one virtually, and then I have another on Sunday.
Jeez. All right. Well, we're privileged to have you here now. So
Well,
um,
thank you.
I'll just go back into the backstage, and I'll let you do your thing.
All right, great. Well, thank you, everyone. I hope this finds you all well. This is a very important topic, as was mentioned already. And a big reason for that is, when we get into this AI stuff, not only do we have hallucinations that we're worried about, right? But we also have a lot of challenges around, do I have the rights to train or to mine from certain kinds of content? And when you're looking at the models that are out there in the LLM space, uh, they're all pre-trained on other content, and so you have to kind of ask a lot of questions. Was that ethically sourced? Who, whose data is that? Do they know that their data is being scraped from the web? Recently, Microsoft has come out saying that anything on the open web is fair game. I think that Creative Commons would disagree with a few of those statements. But the fact of the matter is, it's a true problem that we're all facing. And so one of the things that I want to walk through in this presentation is, there's a lot of these challenges in the AI space, but there's a lot of other opportunities that we can look at from a content perspective. So if you yourself are a content creator, or your company publishes content or creates content, or you just have internal content for that matter, you have to understand how that space plays with the LLM space. And this is the important part of the trust factor. How can you trust what the AI is responding with? Those hallucinations are getting the better of a lot of folks. I think we've heard that so far in other presentations, and I'm sure we'll hear more about that later on. So let's get into, how do we make sure that we are, one, doing this all ethically ourselves, understanding what we can or should use content for in the AI space, and then building out that AI trust factor. So one thing I would encourage everyone to do is, especially if you're working in an organization, you really want to work with your stakeholders and your tech team and whoever, your vendors, whoever is doing AI at your organization. You really want to work on AI tenants. These are going to be your lodestone, the things you're always keeping in mind while you're working in the AI space. So these are some to consider. You really want to think about that quality. How authoritative or trustworthy is the data that you're putting in? Are you looking at human in the loop, making sure that you have good representation in the humans that are training and interacting with this AI? That transparency is clear labeling where AI is being used, because it's not as clear cut as maybe other features. We now see a lot of, even if you go into your Apple store, your Apple apps, there's a whole area now on AI powered apps. So some people are really getting into the AI backing of like what's happening and in their own products, while others are not as forthcoming. And so that's why being very transparent in where AI is being used is important. But the other side of that coin is in the content space. You really need to understand where you can use AI with your content, whether you're generating with AI or if you're training the AI on content. So you really want to have the transparency of how all of that's working. The other factor in there is the model transparency. If you're not familiar with it, there are leaderboards out there for AI. Don't be fooled by those. Don't use those as your main decision points, mostly because those can be easily rigged, and there's a lot of documentation out there on that. But one you might want to consider is there is one called the Stanford Transparency Index. Now, that one is more talking about the models and their transparency factor. How transparent is the model on how they're doing things, what data was used, what humans were in the mix of all of those things. And so you can go and see what that looks like. And that's a little bit better from a perspective of you can then go in and make your own decisions based on some of that information. Information literacy, I will lightly touch on here because I have another slide on it later, and it is incredibly important. AI, or information literacy, is how do you understand the trustworthiness of an AI response? And how do you understand the appropriate uses of content in the AI space? So, as an example, if in your organization you do not have a license to, let's just pick on ChatGPT for a second, just pick a name out of the hat of your AI. Um, if you're looking at that and you're not using a license and you are using it to ask questions about your organization and generate, let's say, blog posts, or you're using it to, maybe help you with a pitch that you're trying to work on for your organization, and you're not using a licensed instance, what you're doing is providing uh, training data to those AI that you probably shouldn't be. And so it's that kind of information literacy that we have to help others with, because a lot of folks don't really understand what the AI is. There's court cases where lawyers actually were using ChatGPT to create their defense, and they were asking for what precedence there was, and ChatGPT made up certain court cases. The lawyers did not go back into the tried and true books to check that out, and so they got in a bunch of trouble. So this is just one example. So really understanding how to teach and focus on information literacy is pretty important. Equity, of course, goes into those ethics, making sure that you really understand where the data came from, what is represented in that data, the people, if they are people represented in that data, did they know their data was being used and scraped to be used in AI? That's something you have to keep in mind. And user value, like making sure that you're not just throwing stuff at the wall. And honestly, the thing that's going to get you there first is the cost. If you're using AI and you don't really need to be, the cost is pretty high if you're not using it appropriately where it needs to be used. And then data integrity, which is a big part of this presentation, which is making sure that you're complying with data policy and making sure that you're protecting the IP and the copyright of whatever content that you are using, as well as any information. If you are asking AI about anything, making sure that you know what that information is and you're okay if it goes into a training set, if that's what's going to happen with it. But the other side of it is also making sure that your users and their data is also protected as you go into this. So some of the AI literacy things I just want to cover because that's a big trust factor in what we're talking about. And this goes into the copyright piece too, right? Because whoever you are working with, if you are licensing data or you're licensing information of some sort, because you can license data sets as well, is making sure that you really understand what those things can be used for, really making sure you can track how those things are being used when in relation to AI, because those are the areas you're going to get in trouble if you're not paying very close attention. So Here, let's take an example from a research and development organization. What is appropriate use of AI in their research? Like, do they know that? Are there regulatory compliances that they need to take into consideration? If you're in finance, there's a lot of regulations around use of data, but there's not a whole lot yet in the AI space. So, really looking between the lines of what's already out there from a standards and regulatory perspective, and understanding how that might then translate into how you're using AI. Can you verify the AI text is not plagiarized? This is something a lot of folks I don't think realize is sometimes AI is sort of like a blender. You put a bunch of content in, and you might know, these strawberries came from this grocery store, and that honey came from your local farmer's market. But as soon as you press that blend button, it goes and it's all gone. It's a beautiful, lovely, amazing smoothie at the end, but you don't know where any of the individual parts are anymore. It's kind of how AI works with the pre-training. But once in a while, you get a big chunk of strawberry. And so you really do need to, even if you are using generative AI, you really do need to make sure that it's not plagiarizing from something from its pre-training or from your own content, because sometimes that can happen. Whole sentences can be extracted on accident, depending on what the AI model is up to. How do you fact verify? We're going to get into that, so I won't touch on that right now. A whole pipeline. You can use a whole pipeline for fact verification, where we're going to be using citations, and we're going to be using human verification in the loop to really understand. If you are using vectors, you're using a vector database, which is pretty popular in this AI space now. Just because a piece of content says something doesn't mean it's accurate. In fact, it happens a lot. Us humans like to disagree a whole lot, and we also have a lot of opinions. So, especially like there's a presidential debate coming up. I'm sure there's a whole lot of opinions on whatever's going on. So you really need to be careful when you are using even your own content. Maybe you're using your own GitHub repo, or maybe you're using your own Confluence, whatever it is. If it's being generated by people, by humans, there's going to be opinions in there. There's going to be disagreements in there. So when you use a vector database alone, you're not really getting that trust factor, that verification, which is where knowledge graphs come into this whole picture, right? And we're going to get into that in a second. Talking about that AI ethics and responsibility. We've had some other presentations I know on that. Standards and regulations, those are still kind of coming to the forefront. There's a lot of effort going into that right now. EU AI Act, of course, is coming down the pike for a lot of us, so we need to really pay attention to that. Also, if you have any universities, like if you're an R&D setup and you have universities that you can partner with, they have these things called IRB boards, institutional review boards. Those are traditionally used. They are boards of academics and admin people at universities that know how ethical research is done with humans. Now, they aren't AI specialists, but they do know how ethics work with research. So having them look over how you're doing AI, and you can actually be certified to work with an IRB board for a local university. They can help kind of guide you into the right direction, at least. Which tools are best suited? How do you know that AI is being used, and what is your AI output look like, and is it ethical? Making sure you're not doing any harm to anyone on either side of that coin. And then how do you know that the AI is being used with authoritative data, because you want to trust what's coming out of it. And that's where grounding comes in. And that's where a lot of the focus of the rest of the presentation is going to be on, is grounding the LLM in that source of truth. That source of truth is usually from your organization, based on your data and your content. But, we need to kind of look at how to bring that in a way that can be done in a scalable way. So we're going to get into that now. So I talked a little bit about that grounding. This is how grounding works. This is a LangChain example here. You don't have to use LangChain, but it's a good template to kind of keep in mind. where the prompt comes in, and instead of going right into your vector database and grabbing the vectors that supply answers and sending that into the LLM, instead, I mean, you can do that too, but to supplement, you can then send the query in to a knowledge graph, and that knowledge graph has your entities and facts. So you get statements from your content and from your data and from your organization, and it becomes a fact once it's been verified by corroborating evidence, which is citations. It doesn't have to be like academic citations. It can be finding that same statement in agreement in other documents, or human verification, where somebody comes in and says, yep, that's the fact, that's exactly right, move on with life. So that payload of the entity's statements of fact from the knowledge graph then gets sent to the LLM, and the LLM uses that for grounding itself in that source of authoritative truth, and that gives you much, much better results. So here's a setup of logistics. I wanted to make this an actionable presentation to you. So I'm actually going to walk you through how you can do a POC on this if you are interested. So where we're going with this grounding stuff is there's already a lot of research out there, some bigger organizations coming out. I know LinkedIn just came out saying that they used a graph to ground, I believe, their customer service tickets, and they reduced their time to satisfy those tickets by, I don't know, like 60 something percent, the improvement on the time it took to do that, because they then had a graph grounding the LLM that they're already using for those customer tickets. And on average, people that are using a graph in combination with their LLM in a RAG function, it's decreasing hallucinations by around 48%. It's going to change depending on your data and your use case and how you set everything up, but that's around what people are seeing. And again, making sure that you understand once that content goes into LLM training, it is never coming back out. So if you are really worried about your content being eaten up by an LLM, don't put it into pre-training, because it's going to be very, very, very difficult, if not impossible, to get it back out. Because once it's trained on it, it just goes into the blender. You have no idea where it came from. You can't really get it back out. But if you use a knowledge graph, you can actually retain that attribution of where the content came from, if it was licensed, if it has copyright, if it came from, the legal department. So it now needs to have like certain, checks and balances on it and that sort of thing. If you lock that behind an API that the knowledge graph is behind, the LLM is just querying that API for those entities, and then you're still retaining all the good stuff, not putting all your content into the pre-training of the LLM. So this is actually a really good way of protecting that copyright, if that's a concern of yours. So how can you get started in grounding with your LLM? So we're going to go through this POC. And this, again, the pretend resource here is we are an R&D department, and we have a library of resources, and we are trying to figure out how to use that. And some of it's licensed, some of it's not, some of it's our own creation. And we're going to see how we can use that. So the start of this is gathering the citations. And here you can see, if you want to go out and you actually use citation, you can use like Google Scholar or OpenAlex, or name your research database kind of thing. Or if you're doing this with just your own internal data, you can look at corroborating statements. So if there's interlinks between different pages, like if you're using Confluence, that's a good indicator that something about those two pages has something in common. They're probably agreeing or disagreeing on something. And so you can start to use that to create corroborating evidence, because the more statements that agree with each other, the higher likelihood that it is true or factual. So you're going to go in and you're going to, for this POC, if you're doing this as a POC, grab a certain research topic or a certain database or a certain tool, whatever you want to focus on to do this POC. Then you're going to be looking at the interlinking. So in citations, you can see which citations point to each other. But if you're using Confluence, it would be maybe mentions or links in between the pages. Then you're going to go into the actual flow. And these slides will be shared, don't worry. This one's a little dense, but essentially, let me walk you through how this is going to work. So now you got your POC data set. You know what things are citing each other or referencing each other. So that's this part over here. We've ingested our stuff. The next step is you're going to rank those different data sources that you are using. So maybe Confluence is a higher authoritative source for you because you have data governance on it, or you know that's where the authoritative like documentation happens. Whereas something like Slack or Teams messaging is just a free for all. So if you get anything from there, it's going to be a lower confidence, and so you're going to score those data sources so that it can be weighted as you go through this process. So now you've got those sources weighted. So when you see those statements coming in, if you get 2 statements in from Confluence, but only 1 from Slack, the ones from Confluence are going to be weighted higher than the one from Slack. So if the one from Slack does not agree with the ones from Confluence, the 2 from Confluence are higher quality anyways from your estimation. So those ones will be the winners. So that's kind of how you're going to go through this. And you can create what kind of math you want to do on this, as far as, well, if something is too old or too new, or it's been written by this department versus that department. You know your data and your company really, really well. And so you're going to determine how you're going to estimate if a statement is coming from one place or another, and whether it's more authoritative versus something else. So that's kind of how you're doing this in an automated fashion. So at the end of the day, you're going to come out and honestly, you could use an LLM to help you find those statements, whether they agree or disagree. And you can do that with your own prompting. And what you're going to find is you're going to have a grouping of things that agree and a grouping of things that disagree. We're going to talk about the disagreements in a minute. The things that do agree, if you can do this with corroborating evidence, which is just the citation, seeing what things agree. Sometimes you can find the facts and put them into your knowledge graph with those nodes and the entities, right? And the relations between them. You can assume those are accurate because you have corroborating evidence. And if you don't and you have disagreements, that's where you have to use human in the loop. And that's where you would ask subject matter experts. And that's the latter part of this diagram, where those are the things that you're really going to need a human to intervene on. And sometimes you're not going to be able to pick a winner. Sometimes there is no winner. It's just a disagreement. And that's okay too. We're going to talk about how to handle that in a second. So once you've structured all of those statements, right, you're going to start to mine out, or if you're not allowed to mine, make sure you look at those copyright and content agreements if you are licensing information. Sometimes you're going to have to summarize. Sometimes you're allowed to summarize things instead of generating or mining things straight out of the full text or the unstructured text. And that's also, if you're doing anything internally with your own data, like I used Confluence and Slack, that's people data too, because there's people that are writing that. So you want to check with your HR department and some other folks at your organization to see what you're allowed to use and what you're not allowed to use. So here you're seeing how you can mine out the statements that agree or disagree, and you're going to be clustering those together based on, one, how they cite each other, right? Like this link is talking about those two documents, but also clustering the statements about things that are the same. Statements are not sentences. Statements are saying this Confluence document makes claims or statements about the world, and here's what they are. And those are those like summary statements versus another document that has maybe different ones. And you're going to see which ones have similar content, meaning subjects or different topics that they're discussing. You're going to see which ones agree and disagree. And that's where this clustering happens. And you can use traditional cluster analysis for this. Or like I said, you can use the LLM to cluster them for you and just say, hey, based on this document set, which documents agree or disagree on this certain topic. Then we're going to add this for our graph retrieval, which is RAG. So I'm assuming here that you have a graph that's at play. Now, you may or may not know, but there's now a lot of great conversation going on something called graph RAG, where it can actually generate triples, right? The things that are in a knowledge graph from your full text. Now, that doesn't make a graph, and you still have to do a lot of effort to get that into a graph-like manner, but it's still a good step in the right direction. So if you're doing a POC, then you can start to create triples that way. And you can create the graph network because certain topics will refer to each other. And this is sort of what that looks like. So you can see here on one side are topical clusters. So these are terms from our taxonomies internally or from linked open data sources or content subject tags that all kind of work together. And on the other side is more a people graph where certain people are publishing certain Confluence pages or certain Slack pages or whatever it might be, and those authors and their topics that they talk about and their departments are all mapped out. So you can start to build out the graph based on the structure of your content, your people, or your data. So now we get into AI quality, right? So you can see a 54% increase in accuracy um, when you are using this approach. And remember, we're decreasing hallucinations. So the counter of that is you're getting increased accuracy. So those are the same percentages or the same 100%, but different parts of the percentage. And so here you're looking at the input data is coming in, and now we are adding quality to it. We are saying, yes, this is verified from other documents. Yes, this is verified from other humans. I now trust this more than the LLM making it up because it doesn't understand my content, my organization, my people, my use case. But now it understands that more because I just went through all of this process of verifying the facts either through corroboration or from human verification. Then you have the grounding itself, which is then supplying those facts to the LLM to generate a more grounded in truth response. But the human in the loop is pretty important here because of those disputes, right? So there's always going to be disputes. You always have to have a way to address those. And oftentimes you have to get your LLM to know the logic you want it to follow when there are disputes. So handling disputes. Here's an example way of handling a dispute where you have either something that you give the different statements that differ or that don't agree that you still want to use. You don't always have to use disagreement statements. You can say you don't want to use them, but more often than not, you still do need to use them because there's just differences of opinions. There's different findings. There's a lot of different things in your data that might not all agree. And so that's where you would want to have sort of like this templated approach where the information is being populated from those statements to say, well, there's a dispute, and here's a summary of the dispute, and here's what one side says, here's what the other says. And you can even customize this to departments or to use cases and different things that you're going to need when you're getting into tailoring the LLM responses for your use case. Because at the end of the day, like with our R&D example, we have our research and development team, and maybe they are more interested in finding things that are disputes rather than things that are in agreement, because things that are dispute are maybe higher risk, or maybe they have an opportunity where their research can add to the overall corroborating evidence, right, to feed back into this whole loop, to come down on, having more evidence to decide if there is a winner in whatever that dispute may be. The other area that shows up with disputes is things that are brand damaging or things that are just so mission critical that you have to have not a canned response, but a very highly reviewed, everyone is on the same page kind of response. And this is again where the handling of disputes will really shine and help shed light on what you need to do later on. All right, so tying it all together, this is back to the verification architecture. And you can see here a lot of the things that we went through here, I know this is a short presentation. I do go over a lot of these other things and a lot of like other trainings and YouTube videos and other things that I have. So please make sure to go and check those things out. But you can see a lot of this was automated. And I know a lot of folks are like, human verification, that's expensive. I have to pay people. I have to take time to do that. You should really only do fact verification and human verification. You should only do the verification on things that really matter to your business, really matter to your use case, and also that have a higher probability for hallucination. You don't need to do this for every single statement, every single fact at your organization. You really just want to focus this special treatment on things that are really going to matter for you. And at the end of the day, you're going to have a knowledge graph with all of those entities, all of those statements, now all those facts that the LLM can ground itself in so that it has better results and you will have less hallucinations. All right. So with that, I want to thank everybody for tuning in. I want to get the word out more and more on this because it's so important. It's so incredibly important to what we're all doing, and I hope you've learned something from this.
Thank you, Ashleigh. It's funny enough that we started out with academic practices and the internet to sort of build trust. Where are your sources? Are they credible sources?
Mhm.
And we trust you by association. And the advancements in search engine and content development has kind of
Yep.
geared us away from that. And now we have another layer that interprets information on our behalf. We can't just accept things at face value. We have to
Mhm.
figure out what is underneath and where it comes from.
Absolutely. And yeah, you nail on the head with that. A lot of what we're talking about here is called triangulation. It's been done in academic research since the dawn of time. So it's not something new. It's just something we have to repackage and tweak a little bit for our modern problems.
Um, okay, well, thank you very much. I know you're probably in between talks and conferences, so we'll let you go. But it was a lovely presentation and very thorough. I hope anybody that watches this presentation derives the same value I did. So.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, everyone.